Wow, it is quite busy today. A lot of stuff's happening. And wouldn't you know it, as I'm wrapping up Newswave, getting it all figured out, Valve decides to drop an update on the Steam machine, the Steam frame, the Steam controller, and I guess giving us a bit more of an idea as to where we stand with the idea of this thing coming out in the first half of 2026. And unfortunately, it's exactly what we figured was the holdup, and they just wanted to go ahead and confirm it, as well as do some Q&A for the Steam machine and the Steam frame. So we'll go over some of that here, guys. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. So by now, many of you know I'm quite interested in the Steam machine. I think it could be a really cool thing, specifically to bridge the gap between the living room setup and the PC, the high end PC market, where it's not great necessarily having a big old tower in the living room and then trying to adapt it to like the TV with a controller setup. It hasn't necessarily been that seamless, but I feel like the Steam machine could actually do it, provided they can get it out in a reasonable price, we'll say. Well, this is something they just posted up, the Steam hardware launch timing and other frequently asked questions. And there's one big question that has to do with that launch timing. It's, of course, is also the price. And they decided to just come right out with it here immediately. Before we dive into some of the hardware specific questions we've seen, want to get straight to the two we know everyone is wondering about the most. When will these be launching and how much will they cost? Say when we announce these products in November, we plan on being able to share specific pricing and launch dates by now, but the memory and storage shortages you've likely heard about across the industry have rapidly increased since then. The limited availability and growing prices of these critical components mean we must revisit our exact shipping schedule and pricing, especially around Steam Machine and Steam Frame. And that's a shame because I do think there's a world where they, in their mind, were like, could we get this down to $500? Could we release it at $600? I feel like that's kind of been the range for them. And I know there's been speculation because of the way that like Valve engineers reacted, I believe, to Linus mentioning a PlayStation 5 price point that would have been like 500. But you could also think of them going, oh, is he talking about 4 or 450 for that digital model that this would then compete with? There's no physical media. But still, I do think 600 or less is kind of where they were when they were initially planning this thing out and putting it together on the whiteboard. But the circumstances have changed with these data centers and DRAM and the shortage that's happening right now, everything going up in price, or RAM being removed from different devices that stay the same price, which is basically the same thing in a roundabout way. So now what do they do? Well, they say our goal of shipping all three products in the first half of the year has not changed, but we have to work we have work to do to land on concrete pricing and launch dates that we can confidently announce, being mindful of how quickly the circumstances around both of these things can change. We will keep you updated as much as we can as we finalize these plans as soon as possible. I mentioned before the issue isn't necessarily that first allotment of RAM. Like, I'm sure they already worked a lot of that out before RAM prices and stuff were going crazy. Certainly before they did the announcement for the Steam machine, as they mentioned in November, as they were really showing all the stuff off. Certainly they had a lot of that worked out. But then it's like, okay, what happens when our first batch goes out and we then have to work on manufacturing the next one and the next one? Where will we be with RAM? Because the last thing that I'm sure they want to do is have to raise the price of the Steam machine 6 months in to its run. It's like, man, it's already going up in price. So honestly, you come to the market with that price point outright. So you don't have to go through that whole sequence of, well, now it's $50 more. Now it's $100 more, even though we just released it a few months ago. They do an entire FAQ here where they go over the Steam frame, VR. I'm not as interested in Steam frame, and maybe that's just because of how I kind of see VR right now, which hasn't really taken off. But I do know there are many people who are at least curious about that. So there's an entire section here. I'll just link down below in the description if you want to just click over to it immediately. You can read through some of the Steam frame stuff here. At least it sounds like it'll work with glasses. So I have contacts in, and glasses go back and forth. So there you go. Apparently, if my glasses are small enough, they should fit behind the Steam frame setup there. But down here, they did talk about the Steam machine, and this is funny because this is something else that's been going around a lot are mostly the capabilities of the device because look, it there's a lot that can be done sure from the driver side and optimization. I understand that. But at the end of the day, you do eventually get to the specs that are available. So because of that, with things like 8 gigabytes of VRAM and the GPU being okay, people are wondering about the 4K 60 FPS claims that are being made, how much upscaling's involved, that kind of stuff, right? Because you look at the little chart that shows all that, and there's a little star next to 4K 60, and then you read the fine print and realize there is a lot of tricks going on necessarily to attain that mark. They say in our testing, the majority of Steam titles play great at 4K 60 FPS with FSR on Steam Machine. That said, there are some titles that currently require more upscaling than others, and it may be preferable to play at a lower frame rate with VRR to maintain a 1080p internal resolution. In the meantime, we are working on HDMI VRR, investigating improved upscaling, and optimizing ray tracing performance in the driver so that we are approaching this from multiple angles. Actually, I know people look at that and go, it's over for this thing. Now, I like the idea of optimization more and more as we're going along, and this whole thing with DRAM right now that's happening, because eventually developers are going to have to come to terms with, you know what, we probably will have to make this work with an 8 gigabyte VRAM card. That's just the way it is, because that's how things are going to be for the next few years. So maybe we should make sure our game actually runs well day one. Just putting it out there. Maybe it is more optimized than we initially were planning. And I think then if they look at it from the perspective of now people maybe with lower end gaming setups can enjoy the game too, or at least approach it in some way, you might end up just stumbling backwards into a larger base that you can sell to then. So at least there's that. Still, I'm curious about some of the things they're able to do here with things like HDMI VRR. We've already talked about HDMI being kind of a strange thing with them and how Linux and stuff and SteamOS were set up, but it seems like they're overcoming some of that anyway, and improved upscaling. These are all things that we figure would also translate over to SteamOS as it becomes more and more available. Just outside of what Valve has here, I've talked about using Bazite and stuff, but I'm just thinking about Valve, the company behind SteamOS, really working to improve it from that software and driver side to accommodate the living room setup, because right now they have it on the Steam Deck, and all that really needs to accommodate is the handheld with a smaller screen. But now they have to think about the big 65-inch display in the living room, with 4K being available. So I actually like that quite a bit to see what they can come up with. And then third parties, people saw the faceplates. Of course, that turned into a whole thing because Valve leaned into it, where you can design and do all kinds of fun stuff to personalize it. Again, great idea. They say, will third parties be able to make faceplates for the Steam Machine? Will you be making the CAD for those faceplates available? And they do plan to share faceplate CAD specs details in the coming months for customers and manufacturers to make them. So I do hope that the Steam Machine ends up being popular enough to where we see all kinds of fun designs, and because it's not like it's this massive thing you have to invest in. It's going to be a smaller front panel with, I guess, a piece of metal or magnets, depending on where the magnets are, whether it's, I assume they're in the system, and then the front faceplate would just be pieces of metal that would attach. But it seems like there's all kinds of cool things people will be able to come up with. We've already seen how there were some companies that were talking about putting like an e-ink display on the front, because that's what Valve did apparently in like testing and design for this. So I think there's gonna be some cool stuff coming out of not only just manufacturers, but even people online who want to go ahead and just fire up their own their own programs and set up to design the things. And what components of Steam Machine are upgradable? Of course, the SSD as NVMe 2230 or 2280, and the memory DDR5 SODIMMs, which we already talked about. That all seem to be accessible, and they just go ahead and confirm it here. So the memory here at 16 gigabytes DDR5. I don't know if you'll need to go beyond that for playing most games right now, but maybe you want to use it as more of a general purpose PC as well as gaming, and you want to go to 32 gigabytes. Well, you know what? You too can buy a set of RAM that's more than the PlayStation 5 right now. And the SSD, that is one that should be more relevant. Maybe you want to go up to a 4 terabyte SSD. That's actually something I would consider. It's like, get the 512, see where we are with SSDs right now, and then kind of figure it out. Or I actually have some NVMEs right now laying around. I think some 2 terabyte ones. So maybe I would just take the 512 out, put the 2 terabyte in, reformat, flash the whole thing, and just off and running. But that's all the stuff they had to update. They did also mention the Steam controller down here. Nothing crazy necessarily. Just can I play non-Steam games with Steam controller? And they just say it can work with any game compatible with the Steam overlay. So the Steam controller, not I don't think it's going to be as big of a concern around price increases or having to play around with like park procurement or stuff behind the scenes. It's not necessarily as relevant to the conversation as the Steam frame and well the Steam machine, which as we've already just talked about, leveraging SSDs, SODIMM, DDR5 RAM sticks. It's going to be difficult, but I'm hoping Valve gets this worked out, and I'm hoping it comes in at a approachable price. I think it's gonna be higher than people want to hear as it is. The fact that we're getting this update and they're saying, hey, we got to kind of rethink some things. It's not going to come in at a price point that people are going to be thrilled about. Okay. So I'm still kind of in the neighborhood of 700. And I almost wonder if Valve, because of this, is going to think much harder about the idea of a pack-in game that can kind of soften the blow. And you know what? If they do have that new Half-Life game ready to roll, and we'll say it's Half-Life 3, but it could be anything with in the Half-Life universe. If they have that ready to go and it's bundled in, that might be a situation where people go, you know what? I was going to buy it anyway, so take that off the price, and I will go ahead and pick this up. It's possible. But there we go. We do have at least something from an update from Valve themselves, not AMD in like a roundabout way, from Valve. And we'll just have to follow along because they are still shooting for first half of 2026, meaning we're going to at least hear about the pricing and have it fully released in the next 3 to 4 months. So I'll keep you guys updated on all of that. Let me know what you guys think about this, though, down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.